What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel and another Outriders video. Now, this is video 3 in my series of videos looking at the different Pax trees for each one of the classes that are coming with the new Worldslayer expansion, which of course drops at the end of June. Now we've already looked at Devastator and we've already looked at Trickster, so go ahead and look for those videos on my channel. They're also linked below if you want to see any of those two classes. But today we are going to be looking at the Technomancer, and Technomancer is an interesting one for me because it's the very first class that I played all the way to 30 back in the day and started doing end game content with, in other words doing expeditions. And I used to think that I would be firepower Technomancer, you know, until the day I die, until I discovered the deliciousness that is Anomaly Pyro, of course. But it's still a class that holds very dear to my heart, and so I definitely want to look at what we have available in the Pax trees. Now specifically when it comes to the Pax trees, just once again, these points, you get 5 of them per class, per character, and they are gotten as you start playing the campaign of the new expansion of Worldslayer. And basically by the time you start doing the end game, you will have accumulated all 5 of these points, and they basically just allow you to further on really leverage into the strength of certain builds. And generally speaking, what we've seen with the previous two when we did Devastator and Trickster is that it tends to lean towards, you know, the top one of these branches being something that's more akin to firepower, and the bottom branch being something that's more akin to anomaly. However, in the case of the Trickster, what we saw is that there was some opportunity for basically building something hybrid with one of the branches, and that's of course the case with the Technomancer as well. But the two builds, the two branches that we have available here is of course Desolator and Overseer. And I have to say, I am super excited to actually talk about the Overseer, because it is taking the Technomancer in a direction that I always thought could be possible for the class, but now you can actually do it. However, without any further ado, let's go ahead and look at the top one first, and the top one being Desolator, of course. And as usual, I've broken it down on Excel by taking each one of the nodes apart like this. But essentially we have 5 points that we can spread, and generally speaking you could chop these up and put 2 in the top branch and 3 in the bottom one, but generally speaking you want to get through to the back of the Pax trees, because there usually you have capstones with really powerful abilities, and so that's really the reason why you want to actually push all the way through. Now I do apologize, I have seen some comments in the previous videos about people complaining about the white background. I unfortunately, you know, this is nothing that I can do with Excel here. I've actually tried to find a way to have it have a black background, but of course that's not a thing. So maybe just put on some shades, grab a beer and dive in with me. But starting off with the Desolator as mentioned, and starting with the very first point, we have Initial Striker. Initial Striker says activating skills increases your anomaly power or firepower, so here again we have this hybrid thing, by 15% for 5 seconds depending on which of them is higher. So if you decide to spec into Technomancer but you want to maybe use like some of the bombs, shrapnel, you know, something like that, then you will be stacking anomaly power, and in this case this will actually increase your anomaly instead of your firepower, even though this is technically speaking the firepower branch. But nothing too, you know, crazy here. 15% is decent, 5 seconds is not that long, but still nonetheless the fact that you have this flexibility between the two is actually really cool. Then when we get to the first place where we can actually choose, we have the upper option, which is, move my mouse over there, the other upper option, which is Brain Dead, and then the lower one, which is Lethal Devices. So Brain Dead says that activating Decay or Gadget, so I mean when we're talking about Decay or Gadget, of course Decay is Blighted Rounds, which is the bullet ability of the Technomancer. And then another Decay ability is also Blighted Turret, which is often used to actually boost your firepower if you have a firepower build and you are using Blighted Rounds. And then of course your Decay skills, sorry, that was Decay. Your Gadget skills would be your Cryo Turret, which is the other turret that's available to you as a Technomancer. It would be Fixing Wave, which is generally an ability that can be used to heal or resupply yourself and your allies with ammo. And then last but not least, you have Cold Snap, which can be augmented to basically be this massive ice wave that you can send over the creatures, freezing them in place and oftentimes doing damage. Now this is when you activate either any Decay or Gadget skills, it increases your weapon damage by 15% for 5 seconds. Now again, like I said, generally speaking, for me, the way that I have played Technomancer in the past is the straightforward blighted rounds, stack as much damage onto toxic, and if you're playing Borealis, onto freeze as you can, kind of bullet Technomancer. And then there's the kind of I don't consider it to be meta really, but it is extremely fun to play. But basically dabbling with things like weapons of destruction, the gadget side, you know, of the Technomancer, and essentially throwing bombs, using turrets. Triple turret techno was a big thing for me at a while. I thought it was very cool. So this basically says that if you activate any of these things that I've just mentioned, then you get additional weapon damage for 15%, which is a nice little ramp up. And the point that it comes off, but for instance, both turrets means that you could, for argument's sake, run something like blighted rounds and then crowd turret and blighted turret, and that means that you can constantly just be cycling these turrets, and you're gonna have a lot of uptime for this buff. Yes, you will have some downtime rather when you have cooldown reduction issues, but generally speaking, you could have this on a lot. Then lethal devices, which is the below one, says that your ordnance and gadget skills. Now, ordnance skills are like I mentioned before, so that would be shrapnel, which is the grenade. It would be pain launcher, which is the deck that you put down that shoots the rockets over, and then of course tools of destruction, which I already mentioned, which lets you make a choice between a rocket launcher and a chain gun, a minigun. So this says that when you activate that, or your gadget skills, which you've already mentioned, skills inflict toxic to enemies hit and deal additional 10% of anomaly power as damage if toxic was refreshed. Now, I think lethal devices to me looks like it could be really powerful. Your ordnance is of course something like pain launcher, right? And pain launcher can shoot, you know, these like this entire carpet wave of rockets essentially. So this will proc this stuff a lot. But you also have access to one of the turrets there, and this being of course cryo turret. Cryo turret has a lot of mods and stuff that you can put onto it that make it shoot, you know, faster, make it deal more damage, anything like that. And of course, cryo turret causes freeze as well, which you can capitalize on by also doing more damage against freeze. So there's a lot of synergies that can happen here, but overall, there's just a lot of ways for you to, as it says here, your ordnance and gadget skills inflict toxic to enemies hit and deal additional 10%. Now, this is pretty crazy because this means that if you cold snap a bunch of enemies, you actually not only freeze them, but you also give them toxic. So this is really good, and again, it deals additional 10% of anomaly power as damage if toxic was refreshed. So if they already have been poisoned, like maybe you've shot them with something, or maybe you are applying them toxic onto them with another way, then you're just going to further unstack that. And again, this is from your anomaly power, so you can actually, you know, stack more anomaly as you play this build rather from anomaly instead of a firepower perspective, and you can actually deal a lot of damage. Definitely something that I want to test once the game comes out. I think it's going to make turret based anomaly techno a lot of fun to play. Then getting over to the third part here, which is painkiller. Painkiller says damaging an enemy grants you 5% regeneration for 3 seconds. It stacks up to 2 times, so you can get 10% health regeneration for 3 seconds. This is really powerful, and this is damaging an enemy. So you as long as you're in a fight, you can always have this regeneration active, and this is really fantastic. The Technomancer, generally speaking, is already really good at self-heal because of the fact that how the Technomancer's innate ability for heal works is that essentially all damage you deal translates into life for you. So this just, you know, stacks on top of that, and I think it's a really welcome thing for the kind of play that you sometimes see with Technomancer, which is kind of like an all-in glass cannon kind of style. So this definitely helps out with that. Now, what we'll do with the fourth and fifth is we'll do top, middle, and bot. But we have permanence in the top here as the first one, followed by dissection. So permanence essentially says that whenever inflicting toxic on an enemy has a 100% chance to inflict a random additional status. This is fantastic, and some of the other statuses that are available in the game are of course super great. Like if you were to inflict frozen on this, or you could inflict burn on this, or you can inflict bleed on this. There's a bunch of things that can happen, and this is of course completely random, and this is on an enemy. So you can have one enemy getting hit by one status, the next one with the other one, and this is just really interesting. And the randomness of it means that sometimes it can be really clutch and freeze something that's about to kill you, which is fantastic. And other times, you know, it'll just make something bleed and give you that extra dot damage that's already sitting alongside your toxic, which is fantastic. Now, dissection says that you deal 10% more damage to enemies for every status inflicted on them. So this means that when you hit them with permanence, they're gonna get, let's say for instance you're shooting with a gun that that makes things toxic, or you're using blighted rounds, which causes toxic. Then as soon as you hit them with that, then let's say for instance they now get burn on them. Now they have 2 statuses on them, so now dissection is already giving you 20% additional damage. And of course every additional status that they get on them, like in the example of, let's say for instance you're playing with someone else that's also freezing them or anything like that, then that's just going to keep on stacking up. So this is really interesting. And I mean, if you can get to the point where you have 3 or 4 statuses on something, then you're doing 50% additional damage to it. So I think this is going to be really interesting to melt bosses down if you can get a really status heavy sort of group with you. But either which way, I think this is a pretty solid sort of selection here, especially if you dabble into statuses like Toxic and Frost. Like I'm thinking Borealis Firepower Techno, which essentially always puts Frozen and Toxic onto stuff and deals more damage to that. We already have all this additional stacking damage on that. Now you throw this in as an additional layer on top of that, let's say, like I said, something's burning, and now you deal additional 30% damage to them because they're burning, they're frozen, and they've got Toxic. Just really good. I like it a lot. Then when we go over to the middle one here, we have Necrotic Tissue. And Twin Reaper is the blaster, the capstone. So Necrotic Tissue says damage against elite enemies is increased by 20% when using a sniper weapon. Now, a lot of my techno bros have been pining at sniper techno being a thing for a very long time. But the issue is, at least in my playing this, and it's something that I also dearly want to, make work, is that while it is okay at lower tiers, the point is that eventually health scaling gets it to the point where the sniper rifle doesn't really feel like a sniper rifle. Doesn't deal as much damage as, 1 tapping, 2 tapping, or 3 tapping something. The minute you have to shoot something 8 to 10 to 12 times with a sniper rifle, it just kind of doesn't feel as, powerful as it should. So this says that damage against elite enemies is increased by 20%. Now 20% isn't a whole lot, so I'm not like super impressed by this. But when we get to Twin Reaper, this says that sniper shots have a 70% chance to trigger an echo, dealing 50% of the damage dealt by the shot. Now it gets more interesting. So let's say, for instance, you get that opening shot, you have the correct mods on your gun, you have the correct talent tree selected and everything like that. So your opening shot, it deals, a crit, you hit the thing in the head and it deals like 1,000,000 damage. Then there's a 70% chance that this is just going to echo and deal another, 500k, which can get really interesting, especially if you are using, like, I'm thinking in the case of like single shot sniper rifles now, but let's say you're using something like a burst sniper rifle that shoots like or an automatic one for that matter, and you're able to deal a lot of high damage to a critical spot at once, you're going to be triggering this 70% chance echo a lot, and it's going to punch damage through. So definitely going to get tested once this comes out. I'm not like, again, I'm not super, I think maybe Necrotic Tissue could have been a little bit more. Maybe I don't know. I don't know which percentage I have to say where it starts making me go like, oh my god. But I definitely think it could have been a little bit more. But the Twin Reaper definitely sounds interesting and obviously would be something that we test. Then the last row we have Depleted Core and we have Burrowing Charge as the capstone. Now Depleted Core says, and now of course you can imagine that this last one is going to be around, like, let's say for instance the gadget playstyle, or like throwing bombs, shooting missiles, and weapons of destruction, which is what we see here. So this says your ordnance skills damage is increased by 100% of your status power. Now generally speaking, stacking status is really good if you use things like Toxic, if you use things like Burn, if you use things like Frozen, or because they all affect it in a different way. In the case of Freeze, it makes them stay frozen longer. In the case of Toxic, it makes the toxic tick harder, just like it does with Bleed. So this is really good, especially if you apply those status effects to it. And 100% of your status power is pretty powerful. So again, if you can get this stacked up fairly high on all of your armor pieces and on your weapon, and then whatever other nodes and things you can pick up that boost this, it's actually pretty, sexy. Then when we look at Burrowing Charge, this says that critical shots injects an enemy with an explosive charge for 5 seconds, dealing 100% of anomaly power as damage upon the next critical shot taken. Now there's a lot going on with this. Basically, I'm not a huge fan of these abilities that put damage into something and then procs like 3 seconds later or 5 seconds later, because if those things die before that effect goes off, that's essentially lost DPS to you. You lose some of that damage there. But again, that's not to say that this isn't useful. Something that I've said with these Pax Trees, which is very what's the word I'm looking for, evident, is that in many cases the Pax tree is also about you picking the branch that whether you're playing solo or whether you're playing in a group. And sometimes certain branches are way better solo than they are in a group, and vice versa. This seems like this could be a lot better if you play it solo. But again, like I said, I'm just in general not a big fan of these like store damage onto an enemy kind of things, because if you do get them to proc off, fuck yeah. But if you put that onto an enemy and then somebody else blows that enemy up or something like that, yes, the enemy's dead, but the bottom line is you've invested in this point in a Pax tree to deal all this additional damage, and that additional damage almost never procs, so it's kind of like a waste. Okay, but that's it for the Desolator. I have to say honestly though, with the exception of lethal devices and maybe the idea of what could happen with a sniper Technomancer, or what this top permanence and dissection could do with all the status elements, I'm not seeing anything here that's making me go like, oh my god. But again, I could be wrong, and obviously it's a big difference between looking at stuff on paper and actually testing it out in the wild. So at the moment right now, I'm going to reserve judgment on this, but I definitely don't think this is OP in any way. I could be wrong about lethal devices. I have a feeling. Okay, so then when we move over to what we have, the bottom branch, which is, like I said, generally considered to be the anomaly side, and it's of course called the Overseer. Now, I've already obviously gone through this stuff, so I know what's coming, and I have to say this tree, this Pax branch, has me really excited because it will promote a certain kind of way of playing Techno, which I really think is cool, and which is something that we haven't seen yet. But starting us off with the first stone, we have the Undying. It says every 10% of your missing health increases your weapon leech and skill leech by 10%. This is fantastic because, like in the example of having a bunch of turrets out, those all shoot, and as you lose life, your skill leech goes up, and that means that those turrets heal you more. So it's just like kind of like this sort of like engine that feeds you life. So the worse off you are, the more chance you have to gain more life back. Really cool. Then for our first choice on step 2 here, we have Accelerator or Override as choices. They're kind of like the same, and it basically depends on whether you are going weapon based or whether you're going anomaly based. So again, this leads to the fact that this can be approached in a hybrid way. Is Accelerator says that your weapon damage is increased by 50% of your weapon leech. Now, a nice thing there is it actually gives you a little readout of what that bonus value is, so you don't have to sit there with pen and paper like I always do and sit and calculate this shit. And then of course Override does exactly the same thing, but just with anomaly. So this is really cool. This says that your power is increased by 50% of your skill each. So in this case here, this current bonus is 15%. So this would mean that this character that picks this will be currently being increased by 7.5%, which is not bad at all, to be honest, especially due to the fact that you can really ramp this up, and then of course this bonus ramps up as well. Then when we get to the third tree which you have to take, this is Apothecary. You pulse every 5 seconds, healing all players within a 20-meter radius for 5% of all damage by you between each pulse. So here we have it. You can build a healer class now in Outriders, and that can be the role that you play. So yes, you can still deal damage, and yes, you can do other things, but you can take on a role and say, guys, you can play kind of glass cannon, or you can take your defenses down a little bit, because I'm going to spec in such a way that I'm going to be providing you with healing and other effects to actually keep you up. So you pulse every 5 seconds, healing all players within a 20-meter radius for 5% of all damage done. So this is pretty sweet. I really like this. And I like the idea that we can play a healer or a pseudo healer in the game. Now again, as before, we'll do them, you know, top, middle and bot when we come to the 4th and 5th, the capstones. So Purification Protocol and Lead Seeker is the top one, and this says Purification Protocol says your turrets pulse in a 20-meter radius, removing up to 5 negative status effects from you and your allies. Again, this is, you are playing into this sort of like debuffer healing class now. Just super awesome. I love this. I love the fact that you can take these negative effects off you and your allies. It means stuff that's making you bleed, stuff that's making you slow, stuff that's making, you know, any negative status effect, this will essentially eat up. Now, Lead Seeker says your turrets pulse in a 20-meter radius, replenishing 25% of ammo and granting 25% increased damage for 5 seconds for you and your allies. Again, Just really awesome. Now, something that I've noticed with both of these is it says your turrets pulse in a 20-meter radius. It doesn't say how often it pulses. Maybe it refers back to Apothecary, which pulses every 5 seconds. So maybe we could make the assumption that these turrets also pulse every 5 seconds. Maybe they only pulse the one time when you throw them out. We're gonna have to test this because it's not really clear. But what it does say though is, like when we look at Lead Seekers, it says it replenishes 25% of ammo and grants 25% increased damage for 5 seconds for you and your allies. Now, I think it's pretty badass, and it would be pretty awesome if you throw this thing out and every 5 seconds it pulses and it does this refresh mechanic. That means you, as long as you have your turret out, you are regenerating your ammo for your allies and you're giving them a 25% increased damage buff, which is huge. So then when we go to the middle one, Biosync, your overheal is converted to a 3 seconds health regeneration effect for you and your allies. So usually with things like anomaly power, which translates into skill leech or whatever like that, you're always healing more than you can actually store up, and so that's generally considered overheal. Now this is going to convert that to a 3 seconds health regeneration effect for your allies. Again, it doesn't state how often this can happen, and I don't know if this means that every time you overheal it hits Biosync and it does this effect. And then furthermore, does it mean that, let's say for instance, the first time you proc it, that 3 seconds is worth a certain amount of health regeneration. Now the next time you proc it, your overheal is much more. So does it add it onto that? Does it override it because it's a more powerful effect? Does it fall off because there's already a health regeneration effect available? These are things that we're going to have to test, unfortunately. So speculating about it right now, I would imagine that it probably overrides the effect, but we're going to have to check. Now, behind Biosync as the capstone in the middle, we have Kinetic Converter. This says critical shots heal the nearest ally for 25% of their max health. If overheal occurs, that player also receives 20% increased damage for 5 seconds. This has a 5 seconds cooldown. So it means that you can only ever have this effect live on one person at a time, if I'm reading this correct. And that's a bit sad, because if it didn't have this 5 seconds cooldown, you could have a situation where you could, in a prolonged fight, you can have it up on both of your partners, which is pretty sweet. Then Hastened Influence and Break the Ranks is the bottom one. Hastened Influence says reduce remaining cooldown of one of your skills by 1 second for every status removed by you or applied to an enemy by any player. Now, this again is, since you don't have Purification Protocol at the top here, but like in this example, you could probably pick up both of those and just avoid taking a capstone. That would be interesting, and we'd have to look into that. But the point is, this basically says that it's when you remove statuses, but it's also when you apply them, right? So this reduces remaining cooldowns of all of your skills. Now, generally speaking, turrets on the Technomancer side, you always have another turret available by the time a current turret dies. So cooldown reduction is, even though you spec into it, it's not really such a big deal. However, you do have some skills, some abilities for the Technomancer which have fairly high cooldowns. Fixing Wave is one of them. Cold Snap is another. So a way that you can really drive down those cooldowns super fast is fantastic. And it's cool how Hastened Influence, for instance, feeds into Cold Snap, because this says that it reduces remaining cooldown of one of your skills. However, see, it's one of your skills, so it'll choose at random, so it won't always choose. So if you have other skills on cooldown, it might not choose the Cold Snap. But like, for example, if you Cold Snap like 10 enemies, and it gives all 10 of those enemies 1 second to Cold Snap, that's 10 seconds off the cooldown right there. So that's pretty sweet, and I really think this could be, you know, kind of amazing due to the fact that you can keep on applying, like Cold Snap, for instance. Of course, enemies can resist that, sure, but yeah, I think this might be kind of sexy. And then we have Break Their Ranks. This says your interrupt skills remove effect resistance from hit elites, 10 seconds cooldown. So some of the skills that the Technomancer and all the other classes have an interrupt status to them. If I'm not mistaken, interrupt on the Technomancer is of course Cold Snap, and Scrapnel, I think, is both of those are interrupts. I think that's the only ones, if I'm not mistaken. It could be one of the two turrets as well. I think Cryo Turret might also be an interrupt, but off the top of my head, I can't remember. But any of your skills that have this, and when you go over your skill tree, you can see which ones have interrupts, so you'll easily be able to find it. These will remove effect resistance from hit elites. So this to me says that in a prolonged fight where you are applying statuses to a boss or a group of elites the entire time, eventually they will start resisting a lot of these. So if that is a problem in group play, then you can, you know, sort of spec into this, and this will actually start stripping those resistances off them. But it has a fairly super long cooldown, 10 seconds. So again, fighting lots and lots of small elites, probably not so much, but fighting a boss that is a prolonged fight that helps you to get some of those resistances off might just, you know, be the thing. But that is it. Basically, that is it for the Technomancer tree. Like I said, about the above tree, there's not anything necessarily that is just, you know, jumping out at me. Lethal Devices looks interesting, gotta test that, but there's not anything that jumps at me and goes, oh my god, I'm super OP. But when we look at the anomaly side, the Overseer, I am so chuffed with the idea that you can actually build into a healer class now, or like a hybrid healer damage dealer class that essentially excels at keeping your allies alive. I think that's really cool. I like the idea of the game kind of like pivoting, or allowing you to pivot into the classic roles that you would see in a game like this, like someone playing more tanky, someone playing more DPS, and someone playing like a healer that can take care of those two. So super interesting. Let me know what you think about the Technomancer and the changes here. And out of the three that we've looked at so far, the Trickster, the Technomancer, and the Devastator, which one has impressed you the most? Now, I've left the juiciest for last, so the next video and the final one in the series that's coming out is of course going to be on the Pyromancer. Super excited for that. I'm a Pyromancer main, so I can't wait to do that and share with you guys. I think Pyromancer is shit hot, pardon the pun, in the expansion, and I think it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun to play. But that's it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. It's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, a great afternoon, and a super awesome evening wherever you are in the world. Until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.